Thank you so much for joining us again for another epic episode. Today, we'll be talking about his memoir, Never Far From Home, his journey from Brooklyn to hip hop, Microsoft, and the law. Microsoft's Associate General Counsel shares the inspirational story of his rise from childhood poverty to pre gentrified New York City to a stellar career at the top of the technology and music industries in this stirring, new, true story of grit and perseverance. Today, he will unpack some nuggets and gems, and you will have to buy his memoir on Amazon to find out more. We are so excited to have you here with us today. This conversation is going to be inspirational. I am looking forward to you all meeting my guest today. We value your opinions and feedbacks. Please drop them in the chat. We intend to respond to as many comments and questions from our audience as possible. This always takes a great deal of effort on our part. We are always eternally grateful for our loyal guests. Every week, we create new content and look forward to you subscribing to our YouTube channel to keep up with us. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a personal DEI consultant and EQ coach. And today, my special guest is looking forward to unpacking his memoir, Never Far From Home. Today, a trailblazer in his own right, I will let him introduce himself in his unique way.
Hey, hello, my name is, first of all, thank you very much. It's an honor to be on this podcast. I've been watching it and following you for some time now. So it's certainly an honor to be here before you and your audience. Like you said, my name is Bruce Jackson. I'm Associate General Counsel slash Managing Director of Strategic Partnerships at Microsoft. I work out of the Office of the President. And what that means, essentially, my new role, I had various roles. I've been with Microsoft for over 22 years now. So I had various roles supporting $15 billion and $20 billion business. But my current role, I'm really the executive for New York City, one. And I'm also working on strategic partnership with other S500 companies around social issues, whether it's sustainability, whether it's skilling, digital skilling, those type of things that I'm working on now. And continue to try to advance diversity and inclusion every and anywhere I go.
I love that because in there you mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think we probably need to, go back and see, what your memoir really unpacks for us and for you as a Black professional male. And I want to thank you. I did receive, the PDF version of the book because the release is in February 2023. So look out for it on Amazon. And you can always pre-order his book on Amazon. But first, I want to ask you, can you talk about your loneliness during your first years at Microsoft during a time when it only began to diversify?
All right, first of all, I'd like to give just a general disclaimer. All comments that I'm making is really my comment. It's not Microsoft's comment at all. I think when I think about Microsoft, when I started, it was 2000. I actually left New York and I went to Redmond, Washington. And the first thing was there was not a welcoming committee, right? And I was the third African-American attorney at Microsoft. One had left. So there was only myself and a young lady there at the time. So that was totally different. I'll say in addition to that, just the population of Seattle was 6%, but Microsoft, where we're located, is Redmond, Washington. I would say it was less than 0.5%. I would see perhaps one African-American a day if I'm lucky. So that's part of it. And like I said, it almost cost me my job. Essentially, after about 2 years, I went to the vice chairperson and said, listen, I'm leaving. And I was leaving primarily because of the lack of diversity. And at that point, he had a discussion with me and he said, let's find a job for you in New York. And that's was probably why I'm still here at Microsoft. But I think in terms of a story I can tell you, I think I first walked into Microsoft wearing a suit because I was an entertainment attorney for a number of years. And I thought that was the protocol. And I did that for about 3 months and people would tease me and say, Bruce, Are you going for an interview? Why are you wearing a suit every day? So finally, I got the message and I said, you know what? My friends in New York wouldn't like it, but I went and I bought probably 6 Dockers, different colors. I even had green because that's the type of things they were wearing there. And because of the loneliness, what I did, no one really invited me after work. No one invited me to their house on the weekends for drinks. So I spent most of my time working, to be quite honest with you. And it got to a point where one day I walked into my office and the team had decorated my office as an apartment. They had curtains on my door. They had ironing board, iron. They had refrigerator. And the mess, it was obvious. The message they were saying is you spend way too much time here. But I had nowhere else to go, right? So I just continued to work hard, very little socialization. But it's certainly dedicated a chapter to that whole experience in my book. So there's a lot more to read about the loneliness.
Right. Do you think also that, the audience is probably thinking, well, if you were so lonely, and I'm talking, broadly, if you were so lonely, why didn't you assimilate yourself?
I think I do that all the time at work, right? But I still culturally like to be around diverse people. I like to be around African American. That's just me. So I was about to make a choice, right? Because my happiness is to be around diverse group of people, and particularly African Americans, if I can. So that's where I get my strength, right? So to me, I wouldn't have been my full self 100%, continue to be in an environment where I wasn't happy.
Right. And is that something that you do now? You bring in your authentic self? I mean, you're not wearing the suit or the blazer.
Not at all. I think that I give Microsoft a lot of credit, particularly Brad Smith, who's a co-chair, for allowing me to be me throughout the 22 years. Certainly give him a lot of credit, but I wouldn't allow it any other way to be honest with you. Wherever I would have landed, I would have to be me, and I wouldn't compromise that for anything.
Right. What is it like working as a Black professional in an all-white space?
I think it's challenging. And I'll give you some challenges I had early on, absent Microsoft. I think after getting out of law school, I basically, when you're in law school, your second year of law school, what happens is you go on an internship, and a lot of students select which firms they want to work for. I selected a tax firm because tax was my expertise once I got out of law school, and I was a tax attorney. So essentially, I selected a tax firm, and it was highest paying tax firm at the time. And I actually went out with the entire staff, some associate, many partners, to a club. I remember vividly, for lunch, the Georgetown Country Club. And at that club, the name partner, was talking to another associate, and he turned to the right and he asked me a question. He said, Bruce, you know something about the ghetto. And at that point, I paused, because I always learned to pause before I react. I paused and said, well, to myself, this is going to be the end of this job at this day, at this moment. And I responded to him and I said, I know nothing about the ghetto. Now, mind you, I could have told him everything he wanted to know about the ghetto. And some people would have laughed that off and joked it off later, but I'm not ever going to compromise my dignity for money. And so I said, perhaps you can tell me something about the ghetto. Perhaps you know a lot more about the ghetto. And everyone's at the table. So everyone paused at that point, didn't know what to say. And within 2 minutes, everyone left and we head back to the office. By the time I got to the office, everyone certainly apologized. The firm ended up hiring me out of all the associates. And at that moment, and I talk about this in a book as well, at that moment, one of my friends said, Bruce, so why are you going to that firm? And there was a racial comment made. And I said, well, as a tax attorney, I said, there aren't many Black and tax attorneys, and there's not many options. So wherever I go, I think I'm gonna have to deal with it. So let me deal with the devil, so to speak, that I know, as opposed to one that I don't know, and let me maneuver in that background. So I think, yeah, the comment was made. Now, all fairness to the partner, maybe it was unconscious bias, but my philosophy was, it was a stereotype that he had, And I didn't want him to fester that stereotype or come up with other stereotypes. So I rather deal with it. And going forward, he would think before he make a comment, a racial comment, based on the stereotype going forward.
Absolutely. So that instance there was when you brought your full self to the table. And like you said earlier, you were not going to compromise your integrity or dignity for any amount of money. And do you think now, when you look back, that was the fuel to give you the confidence that you needed because you actually flipped the script?
I think I had that few. I kind of got it in college, to be quite honest with you. At that point, because this is another chapter about college. I entered college through a hip hop program, which is a program that allows students who are both educationally and disadvantaged to attend a university. And the program was really dedicated. The summer program I attended prior to getting into college, which was a requirement, we focused on Black history. And once I started understanding the history of our people, our history, at that point, it's two things that have stuck with me for the rest of my life. It was a Frederick Douglass quote: "There's no struggle, there's no progress." Because my philosophy is people may be privileged, but no one's smarter than me, right? They're just privileged, right? If you take a privileged kid out of a privileged environment, put them in an inner city, the results will be just the opposite. So it's all about opportunity. So I learned that probably in college. I started focusing on it. So I said, no struggle, no progress. So I'm going to struggle, right? But I'll make progress every day. And then there was also the quote by Longfellow, Henry Longfellow, that talks about the height of great men and women reached by great men. I'll say, and women reach were not achieved overnight or by sudden flight, but they, while their companions slept, were toiling upwards in the night. So that was just, listen, you can outwork people because the average person doesn't want to work more than the minimum. They want to work the minimum amount of time required. So
Right.
if someone wants to work 9 to 5, if you work 9 to 5:30, you'll catch them over time. So my philosophy always in life was, okay, you have an advantage over me, but I'm gonna catch you in time. And
Hmm.
so it's that whole Frederick Douglass, no struggle and outworking people, the Longfellow quote that kind of drove me. And my thing is, at the end of the day, I had a discussion with an executive from a Fortune 500 company in my role. And he said, "You're pretty direct." And I'm pretty direct too, Bruce. Where do you get it from? I said, "I know no other way." And he said, "You'll speak truth to power." So I said, "Yeah, I would." I said, "Because I have nothing to lose." He said, "I'm the same way." I said, "Well," I said, "certain people in your position are not the same way." I said, "Because you may compromise your values because of fear of not having, not knowing what's on the other side. It's like death. I don't know what death looks like, so I'm afraid of it." I said, "However, I know what poverty looks like. Not saying I want to be poor, but I know what it looks like to be that way. So I'm not going to compromise my value because I know what it looks like if I don't have anything, right? And I'll survive. And other folks in your position are afraid of that. And I'm just not. That's why I'm willing to speak the truth."
All right. And that tenacity that you had sounds like, if you can tell us a little bit about your upbringing, like that tenacity is I can't even find the word. It's not priceless, but there's inner strength that you have to bring your full self, to the table. Where do you think that all that came from?
I would have to say women played an important part of my life, right? I think when I was ready to quit, I was ready to quit, to be quite honest with you, college. My aunt called and said it was a summer program, which is the requirement for starting college. She said, "Bruce, and I said, "I want to quit." She said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm coming back home." She said, "You can't come back home." I said, "Well, why not?" She said, "Because you're not doing this for you. You're doing it for your grandmother who slaved and who worked in a people's houses all her life. You're doing it for your mother who worked in a peanut factory. You're doing it for me. But more importantly, you're doing it for the next generations of Jacksons, because we have never attended college, and you have to set the tone for everyone else. So at that point, I hung up and I said, I can't quit. It's not for me. This is bigger than me, right? It's bigger than me. No one in my, not generation, no one in my family ever went to college. So, but since then, people look at my family and it's like, and my kids, we never had a discussion about college. They all went to college, graduated and doing well. So I think that that's why I did it. It was women who I saw sacrifice, particularly my grandmother. And I said, you know what, let me make her proud. Unfortunately, she didn't live long enough to see me graduate from college, but she's the strength that I have to say, hey, listen, if you can speak your voice, because I grew up in an environment where I was not able to even look at people. So
Mhm.
I carry all that with me.
Right. That was a huge trigger for me because I think at the end of the day, we need to definitely make our ancestors proud and just take that torch and keep passing it on. But in order to be able to pass it on, I strongly believe that we need to become better to do better. And then when we become better to do better, then we can give more and then teach more and allow others to follow in our footsteps.
Right. No, absolutely. But, and I think too, I mean, you got this whole imposter syndrome. People don't feel like they belong. But my philosophy is you got to be great. In order for you to be great, you got to be you, right? You can't be something or someone else to achieve greatness. It is in you, and you have to be you in order to be the best you. And so that's what I always encourage people. My story is no different than many stories. I'm just, I've been given an opportunity to share our story, which is why with the royalties, I tell people I'm giving the royalties back to not-for-profits that serve the underserved community. They said, why? Because I said, this is not a creative story. This is not a creative writing exercise. My God, this story is the story that was created out of the community that I came from. So why shouldn't they benefit from anything that comes from this? So I think that, and I want to encourage people to be themselves, and it's okay. I haven't been fired yet for being me and hiring a diverse team, right? I think oftentimes I tell my colleagues and others, I say, let's look at, and when I had the team of $20 billion I supported, half of the team were African Americans. And I did that intentionally to stack African American attorney up against $20 billion so people internally can see and people externally can see, right? And and that's why I just created a culture like that. And to be quite honest with you, one of the leaders on my team was someone from Fargo, and he had everyone on his team was African American. So he just bought in on making sure the slates are one person is a woman, one person is of color, and making sure everyone on the slate has a fair opportunity to get the job. And that was the culture. We didn't exclude anyone at all. It was just about including people and giving everyone a fair opportunity to get a job. And I think what we should start looking at, because we talk about organizations and we talk about organizations that we want to dismantle and make it more diverse, we need to start looking at Black leadership in some of these organizations and look at their org chart. And sometimes you'll notice that their org chart reflect the same org chart that we want to dismantle and be diverse. But we give them a pass. We should no longer give people a pass. And these sometimes are the same very people who are talking about diversity and inclusion, but they're not talking about it from the perspective of how it can help us as a group. They're looking at how they can benefit individually. And people say, Bruce, that's a private conversation. I said, well, no, it's not. Everyone knows that Black people don't hire Black people like they should. And not only that, do we spend our budgets in terms of outside vendors the same way. So no, I think we need to start calling people out, period, whether you're Black or white and you don't have a diverse organization.
You made some pretty interesting, you mentioned some pretty interesting, various topics. And I think one of them that really stands out to me is when we look at a Black leaders organizational chart, it's the same one that we're probably trying to dismantle. Do you think also that, and I'll include myself as well in obviously this whole conversation, do you think also that we perpetuate the racism by excluding other Blacks to be able to have more opportunities because we don't know if we're going to keep our Black leadership role if we don't follow the mainstream?
Yeah,
Right?
my view is they're not helping the cause when they do
Right.
that, right? They're certainly not helping the cause when they do that, because they are, and we are, including myself, in a position I am because other people have helped, right? So it shouldn't stop, right? You can't stop it. I tell my team members, listen, it's an obligation for us to continue to create a diverse workforce, right? If I do it and when I leave, it stops. It's been in vain. It has to be able to continue on. So no, I think they are. I look at them like anyone else who's not really promoting diversity, and promote not just talking it. I like to see the results, right? Because a lot of people are talking diversity. What I look at is results. Let's look at your organization.
Right. Absolutely. And when we think of, your painful prejudices that were targeted at Black male professionals, can you talk about that, and if that's something that you've experienced?
I think some. I think, but it's. I would say women and people of color have experienced that, right? I think focused on Black men. You're right. I think it's hard. I think one of the things that I would say is just stereotypes, right? And I think it makes it difficult for us to just work. It's more than just working. Like I said earlier, those two quotes drive me to work hard, and we have to be better. But in addition to that, there's a book that was written by Claude Steele, Whistling for Volti. He talks about stereotype threats, and that's just the extra burden that we carry that may not wouldn't benefit us, right? It make things hard, and we may not perform as well because we carry it. And you may say, well, what is that, Bruce? The stereotype threat. Well, in his book, he talks about an African American male walking in one direction and a Caucasian couple walking in the other direction. And as a result of the stereotype, they both have this anxiety or frustration to try to dismiss the stereotype. So they're both uncomfortable walking to each other. So what the African American started to do, because he started to notice people pulling their bags, walking closer to the wall. So he started whistling Vivaldi. So when he started whistling Vivaldi, that eased the stereotype or dismissed the stereotype, because African American person whistling Vivaldi, okay, he doesn't quite fit the stereotype that I'm associating with this class or group of people. And if you need further clarification, how that, and so we carry, people who are privileged don't carry that to work. We have to be better, and we carry this extra thing, the anxiety, the frustration. How do we actually dismiss the stereotype? And to give you another clear example, let's assume for a moment we have a top A student at Stanford University, white student, deciding he or she would like to take an African American class. And this is a top student, and this is a study, it's been performed, right? And the student actually is taking the class, but the student now has stereotype threat. And the threat for this student is, I don't want to be associated with the stereotype associated with my class of being a racist. So this person's in this class not saying anything for fear of being viewed as a racist, not participating in class dialogue, and as a result, doesn't perform as well. So that's just an example, and that's been a scientific study done by Professor Steele. So if you imagine that student not performing well, now imagine an African American going to work, working harder, but also carrying this extra frustration, anxiety to work, how that impacts our performance as well, right? It's hard.
I love that. And again, it's an extra layer of anxiety, I think, that most of us carry. Do you feel that it's less, though, now that you bring your authentic self to the table? Or
I
you
think
always have?
I think you're going to always have stereotypes. It's just that it just doesn't bother me as much, But when I'm confronted with it, I'll deal with it head on.
Mm. To be able to hold that person accountable for what they've said or done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. You have to. I think you have to, but some people would laugh it off and have private discussions later. I think you just deal with that right away.
Right. So what was it that wanted you to start this memoir?
Well, like I said, I practice entertainment law. Um, and my clients for years have been approaching me and said, Bruce, you should write a memoir because you can really help Black young men who grow up in the inner city. You can give them an option other than being a entertainer or a basketball player. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And I wasn't ready, right? Because I said you have to be vulnerable for that. And it just, with about a year and a half ago, I was approached again by the same client. And this time he had an agent on the phone. And the agent said, you have an incredible story. I think we can get you a publishing deal. And I said, at that point, I'm thinking, why are you in it? You're in it for the money, I'm sure. And time is actually perfect for you and the publisher. And then he asked me, he said, well, what do you do now to get your message out? I said, well, I go to school and I speak to students. He said, well, that's not scalable. He said, if I offer you an opportunity to do something that's scalable, we can reach more people. Why would you care whether we make money? So I paused and hesitated and said, okay, you're direct as well. And ultimately, I spoke to a few close friends and associates, and they said, Bruce, as long as you tell the truth and everything and not pick and choose what should be included, it'll be a great story. And that's what I did. I didn't pick and say, this sounds good. It's what came to mind, and what happened. So the book really reveals nothing but the truth, good and the bad. And so the whole thing is really about inspiring people, right? Initially, it was people of color in my background. But I think after I finished and having a discussion with the vice chairman, he said, Bruce, no, your book will inspire not just people of color. He said it inspired people in middle America, where he came from was Wisconsin. He said, we don't deal with racism, but we have economic issues, and we need to be inspired to break out despite our situation. And he said, corporate America is the same way. People have challenges, and they need to figure out how to get through those challenges and how to get on the other side. And he said, I know you're focusing on people getting to the other side, whether they walk around or break through the wall. And I said, yeah, you're right. My philosophy, let's break through the wall, because that way you can pull more people behind you. And he said he thinks it would do well. So I think the book is an inspiring book for everyone. I think the book also, the reason I wrote it, and I think, is to bring proximity to people who are not of color, to give them proximity to the life of someone who lived in the inner city. And hopefully that will breed empathy. And hopefully that empathy would result in support. Mm-hmm. So that's something else I'm trying to accomplish. And I think in corporate America, how do you maneuver within corporate America or any organization? And I talk about the sponsorship versus the mentorship, and having a sponsor who has influence in that room. If it doesn't happen organically, you don't have a sponsor, how do you go about getting that sponsor? I think that's important for us, because many of us don't have sponsors. We may have mentors who can educate us about a particular organization, how to maneuver. But in terms of moving up in those closed door discussions, when people are saying, who's next? Who's in the pipeline? You need to have someone yelling your voice. And so that's when you need sponsorship. So part of the things, I'm going to talk about that as well. So those are some of the things that I think people will get. How did I actually get to where I am within Microsoft Corporation?
Right. You know, there was something interesting on page 2 that I really enjoyed. And it says here, it says, some people, and this is especially true of those who grew up poor, like to dig at their roots until they give way ultimately, and there is nothing to draw them back. It makes it easier to shift into something else, to blend in at corporate functions or black tie charity events. I want to help these people, but don't get the wrong idea. I was never one of them.
No, I think that's it. It's the whole imposter syndrome, trying to be who you're not. And like I stated earlier, I think that hurts you because in order to be the best you, you have to be you, right? In addition to that, just going back to the community where you came from, you have
Mm.
to be you and they have to see themselves in you. So if you are portraying something else, you're not helping the people who are behind. And I think there are a lot of people or brilliant minds behind who just don't have the opportunity. And I don't think we could afford to leave them behind. Now, granted, we're in a system, systemic racism is a system, is designed. I know a lot of people grow up in the projects. They don't want to live in the projects. They want to live a better life. They just don't see themselves that way. So I think that people like myself have to go back and say, I'm you and you're me. I'm your uncle. I'm your cousin. And if I can do it, you can do it. Certainly, if you want to be an entertainer, pursue that. If you want to be an athlete, pursue that. But there are many more Black doctors and lawyers, percentage wise. And that too is an option. So I think that's what I'm trying to do at this point in my life, right? Let's try to bring a lot of people out, not leave another generation behind because we just sit and wait. We potentially on the verge of losing another generation.
Right. And it's important, I think, because now when we talk about the projects, I know my mom and dad, when they left Haiti in the 60s, they left Haiti in the 60s and they went to Boston, where they both studied at Northeastern University. They were both, there were very few Haitians attending Northeastern at that time,
Right.
and you can count them on one hand. And despite, and like you, and I say this story because despite the odds, my parents were able to get themselves out of the projects,
Mhm.
into middle class, because they knew that education was going to get them there. I mean, KKK was thriving, my parents' car was burned, professors vowed to my parents that they would fail, and despite it all, they came out, they had scholarships, and they were straight A students, and that's how they were able to leave at that time. They left in the 70s, because I was born there as well. They left in the 70s and then moved to Montreal. So it's pretty telling, you know, that the odds of coming out are slim, but it's still possible.
Right.
And right, and even though they left an all Black nation and come to America, they didn't have the representation. And I think like I think you're, and like my grandparents and great grandparents, the tenacity and the perseverance to do better and be better, to make everybody else proud, to break that generational cycle. I've been talking about generational cycle and traumas for a while now, and I think you broke that, Bruce. You really did.
Yeah, I think through hard work, but let's also realize that working hard is only part of the formula. I think the other part is having help along the way. And I could name several people at different stages in my life who helped me and motivate me to keep going. So you need that as well, right? I think that's just as important because hard work, people like to say, if you work hard, you'll get out of the get. Oh, no, it's a little harder than that. It's a little harder than hard work to get out of the ghetto. One, you don't really have all the services that are necessary to start off with, including schools or mentors or people who you can see who have achieved and broke through it. But you need help along the way. So I think that's part of forming, which is why it's important for people like myself to go back, right? Not only just to be inspirations, but also to provide help and assistance and guidance, right?
Absolutely.
Part of the formula.
Oh, absolutely. There's also, and we're going back and forth, but I really want you to tell the story about the two fair-skinned officers that pulled you over for a broken taillight. You can state as little or as much as you would like.
Yeah, we talk about that in the book too. I think it started at that point. I was managing a team, and I think we did our first $100 million deal. So there was a little celebration in the office that day. Now we're doing deals, teams doing deals in excess of $1 billion, but it was 100 million was a big deal at that point. So celebration, I said, I'm going to go back and celebrate with people from my neighborhood. So we went to the store and it was a supermarket, bought some crabs and some beer. And we said, we're going to have a little feast, a little celebration. So I thought. And by the time we pull up to the projects, at that time I had a BMW car driving there. So that's not always a great thing if you are an African American in a neighborhood like that, because then there's stereotypes. So I saw the cop car following me up the hill. I saw it and I said, okay, something good's not gonna happen. And I was in a car with someone, and at that point, they pulled us over, and I knew the drill. So I was looking straight ahead. What's the reason for the stop? I wasn't trying to be difficult at all because I know the consequence of that. And he ultimately, at the end of the day, the person I was with said this is racism. I told her to be quiet because they threatened to arrest her as well. And I said, why don't you just take the car, the food, and celebrate? And I'll see you all when I see you because I think I'm going. And so they arrest me, and I went through the entire system. I mean, they shipped me at least to 3 different locations in the course of the night. But that's not the first time I was arrested, right? And I was an attorney at Microsoft at that point. Second time I was an attorney, and the first time ever arrested, I was 10 years old. So that's just, at the end of the day, I tell people and I tell my colleagues, and they're shocked by that. And I said, listen, at the end of the day, I can do $1 billion deal here, well respected in these 4 walls. But once I leave, I'm an African American man with a bald head in the city. And so I'm not shocked by that. Was I shocked by it? No, I think it's disrespectful, and you think we would have advanced further, but people still have stereotypes, right? I could have easily have gotten a disappearance ticket and say go home, but instead they chose to put me through the system and spend the evening in jail. But that's just life. It can happen today, to be quite honest with you. If you say, Bruce, would you be surprised? I would say, no, I wouldn't be surprised. Just don't want it to happen on a Friday because I may have to spend the weekend in jail. One day is I can tolerate. If you start going beyond that, it's like, okay, this is not so good.
Right. How do you think does that affect you? Do you carry it with you? And
I carry it with me in the sense that whenever I drive, right, to be honest with you, and I pass the cop, the police officer, I'm hoping nothing's wrong with my light. I'm hoping nothing's wrong with my muffler, nothing. Because I don't want to go through that system again, right? I don't want to. And so that's how it affects me, right? Every time I pass a police officer, I'm like, God, hopefully everything's okay with this car because I don't want to go through this.
Right. So you carry that with you?
Oh, absolutely. I carry it with me.
Every
Absolutely.
day.
Oh,
Right.
absolutely. Every day.
What would be your takeaway in all of this, from where you grew up to the transitions you've made to going to college, working as a lawyer in the entertainment industry, hip hop industry to be specific, and to now? What would be your takeaway or the message you want to leave?
My takeaway is we have to do everything we can to bring along as many people we can, right? And so that's the mission I'm on, right? Like, as many people I can bring along, let me bring them along. And you can only do what you can. There's certain things you can do when you're in a company, right? So you don't want to have any regrets. I tell all my colleagues, I said, listen, at the end of the day, when I'm sitting on the bench and we got this saying, feeding the birds, I want to do that knowing I have no regrets. And I did everything that I could do to advance this cause, which is what I'm obligated to do, right? Because people have made it possible for me, and just not take my position or the opportunities or the access that I have for granted, and not just use them for myself, but to leverage them to benefit others. And I think we all should do that.
Right. And when that happens, then would you call that a movement?
It is a movement, right? I mean, you start your own movement and you want others to join on, right? And sometimes you just have to be bold and brave and say things others won't say so they can become comfortable and realize that it's possible, right? Sometimes you have to say it to professionals. Hey, it's okay. And I have said it to my colleagues, whether inside or outside Microsoft, it's okay to hire more than one African American. It's okay. No one's going to fire you for that. In fact, you'll feel great for doing it at the end of the day.
Mm. What do you think holds them back?
I think fear, right?
Mm.
Fear. And I think it's fear of moving up, fear of losing income. I think it's fear, right? Other than that, I think people would do it. I would like to think that's the only reason. I would like to think it's no other reason why people would not do that.
Do you think also the media portrays us fairly?
The media never has, but we shouldn't depend on that, right? We should depend on one another to get started.
Absolutely. Bruce, this has been an epic conversation. We can probably do a part two, because I really want to dig deeper into the book, and I'll probably have you back if you're willing to come back.
I certainly will, but the book reveals, like I said, it's nothing. I'm not holding back. And I got to give our vice chairman a lot of credit, right? Because he read the book and he wrote the foreword for the book, right? In spite of, my background, we have different backgrounds, and he recognized that, right? And he recognized what I had to go through, and he still wrote the foreword. So I give him a lot of credit for that, right? And his attempt to try to amplify the story for the purpose of inspiring people across the world, to be honest with you.
Do you think he acted as your sponsor?
Unequivocally. This podcast highlights lived experiences and inspirational stories of strength and tenacity. We share profound and courageous dialogues that influence DEI and emotional intelligence by breaking the barriers and labels of stereotypes, confronting biases, and offering best practices to achieve a more significant and cultural mindset. Stay tuned as we continue to share our voices in the DEI space.